Case, and I'm the Junior Chair of the Gerontological Society of America's Emerging Scholars and Professionals Organization, also known as ESPO, Webinar Task Force. Jamie Hughes, the Senior Chair, and I would like to welcome you to the second webinar in ESPO's Professional Development Webinar Series. The title of this webinar is Navigating the Mentor-Mentee Relationship. I'd like to introduce our speakers, Drs. Debbie Gold and Keith Whitfield. Dr. Gold is an Associate Professor in Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, Associate Research Professor in the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience, and Associate Professor in the Department of Sociology at Duke University. Dr. Whitfield is a Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience, Director of the Developmental Division of the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience, and Co-Director of the Center on Biobehavioral Health Disparities, also at Duke University. Drs. Gold and Whitfield are the leaders of the GSA Mentoring Effect project. There will be time for questions towards the end of the presentation. You may type your questions via your control panel in the text box area. You can also contribute today via our Twitter webinar hashtag, which is #MentoringEffect, which can also be found at the bottom of each of our slides. Please feel free to ask questions on Twitter and share your thoughts live. Thank you to our speakers today, and thank you to our audience for their attendance.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. This is Debbie Gold, and I'm here with Keith Whitfield in hot Durham, North Carolina. We're honored to be able to talk to you about mentoring today. Let me just give you a brief overview of what we're going to discuss. First of all, we'll define what mentorship is and what being a good mentor is, and then equally important, we'll take a look at what a mentee is expected to do and how to be a good mentee. What to do when mentoring relationships get into a little bit of trouble and you may not be getting what you need. And then finally, we'd like to tell you something about the Mentoring Effect, which has been a very active program that we have put together to raise money for GSA mentoring efforts during the annual meeting and during the rest of the year. Let me introduce Keith Whitfield.
Hello, everyone. Wonderful to be here sharing with you what I don't know if there's a cohort effect. I don't know. When I speak with senior people and talk to them about mentorship, people will always say that it was always going on, but it's changed. It's changed in terms of the need for it, I think. I think that it became incidental before, and that maybe in this information age there's so much to sift through. You really need to have an experienced person be able to help you figure out which way is left and which way is right, and where one might want to position their career and their life and all those sorts of things. And so a mentor as an entity has really changed. It's interesting thinking of what the formal definition of a mentor is, which is an experienced and trusted advisor. And this probably, for most of us who think about our mentors, is a pretty good description. So who is a mentor? They are supposed to be wise. It's someone oftentimes who's intelligent, trusted, influential, and perhaps even senior. And it might be useful even to share with you. I never want to speak for Debbie, but I would bet you that Debbie has mentors and I have mentors. And I have different sorts of mentors that provide me with different parts of both my career, even about life, that I will seek out different people because you want to hear their different perspectives and opinions, because even though you might have someone who's this trusted, intelligent, wise advisor, sometimes it's nice to triangulate that information. And so sometimes a mentor is not just simply a mentor, they're part of a mentor team. And so one of the challenges that happens when you kind of become cognizant that you'd like to have a mentor is, how do you actually get one? I mean, do they just appear? Do you just add water and stir? How do you get a mentor? Oftentimes, they are assigned, and I think Debbie would agree with me that this is perhaps the least favorable way that you might get a mentor, but it might be one that, one, works out, and two, that may just be even where you might start mentoring relationships with senior faculty. It might be that you actually just walk up and ask someone. in polite conversation for them to be your mentor. I think it's interesting. I think much like for publication's sake, when you're working with your advisor in graduate school, if you're working with a colleague, that you make very specific about what your expectations are in terms of authorship. I think the same thing ends up coming up as whether someone's going to actually be your mentor. So when you start asking them those questions, they go, yeah, they think about me as a mentor. This fits with what their expectations are and what I've said is okay for expectations. And then lastly, there are those accidental mentors that through contact, through exposure, actually through the incredible power that GSA has, oftentimes we find a lot of accidental mentors who end up fulfilling a need and repeatedly, and that they're there. They don't go anywhere. They're in our field. And so those are at least 3 ways. There's lots of other ways, but those are at least 3 ways that we actually get a mentor.
Keith, I agree with what you're saying. In graduate school and postdoctoral training is probably where there is most clearly a defined mentor. Often that you go and ask, will you be the chair of my dissertation committee? Will you be my postdoctoral mentor? Once you get into the world of academics on the faculty side, however, sometimes the most helpful mentors are people you do pick up accidentally or for a particular purpose. Now, there's been a lot of research done on mentors, most of which is very interesting and helpful. Point taken that mentors are not necessarily friends and shouldn't be treated as friends or expected to understand and do things as friends. That's why we do have friends. Mentors are advisors. They are walls to bounce your intellectual ideas off of, and they're there to help you with your career and with things associated with your career. Probably not appropriate to talk to mentors about more personal issues. They're going to give you advice many times, whether you want it that way or not. They do have a very different perspective. Remember that your mentor has been through what you are going through now. I can remember being a postdoc and thinking, this is so hard. I can't believe how hard I'm working. And my mentor saying to me, this is the least amount of work you will ever do for the rest of your life. And that different perspective really helped me to understand the changes I could expect when I moved down to the faculty level. And mentors are people too, and all of us have good days and bad days. I've had it happen where 12 things have gone wrong, and the 13th thing is my undergraduate I'm doing an independent study with comes in and says, I didn't get a chance to finish my work, and I explode, not because of that, but that's the trigger that allows me to not very professionally respond to all the things that have been negative about that day. Mentors can also be very smart, but not always interpret the world from the same perspective or point of view that you have. I have heard our legendary basketball coach here say that he realizes he's 40-plus years older than his team, and one of the things he's glad about is having younger coaches who can sometimes translate things for him. The same is true of mentors. My mentor in graduate school, I was about 35 and she was 70. So she was not as connected to the day-to-day activities, but the wisdom and the experience that she brought was remarkable.
And so those are some things about on the mentor side. Probably as important is the reverse side of that coin, and that's about being a good mentee, because that's the part that you probably have the most input on, and that the better mentee you are, the greater the likelihood is that you'll get the most out of your mentor. It's interesting, as we were developing this, Debbie and I have different, I think, things that we influence, or that we think are influential, or think that are important, and it's always interesting to see what you would put as the top priority or not. For me, on this next slide, we have probably the most important piece, which is about being on time. For meetings, for assignments, to be on time. That when mentors extend themselves, if they don't see that you're extending yourself to the same degree, it starts to feel like the relationship is uneven in a weird sort of way. And so to me, that's the one way that you really impress a mentor, that if they extend themselves, you're really going to get a lot out of it. Second, that ties and is linked to that is to be prepared, and not just being prepared, but actually be over-prepared. That if you're getting something from that mentor, to actually use that as the base for going beyond the call of duty and thinking about other sorts of things and using that as a leaping off point so that you really do get the most out of what their mentorship is providing you. Another point that it kind of ties almost to something that's biblical, I think, and that's the idea of listen more than you speak. Sometimes we feel so compelled that we have to always be the one talking or saying something. And in a mentor relationship, mentor-mentee relationship, it's critically important to make sure that you're not trying to show your mentor what you know so much as you're trying to get what your mentor knows. And so I have it here as a very kind of warm and fuzzy sort of be in the moment. Be there with them. Don't be thinking 2 steps ahead. Actually listen and try to get what their point is. If you don't get it, ask them. This is mentor-mentee relationships sometimes should almost be like if you were, I don't know, just vulnerable in a way, because you have to say the word I don't know. And that for many of us in the academy is the worst 3 words, I don't know. Yeah, the worst 3 words in a row that one could say. Communication is critical, and so developing clear lines of communication. When you don't understand something, say you don't know. And then that last point, bringing back around, listen more than you speak. Another point is not to make excuses. That, you know, if you gave an excuse, you know, what is it, fool me once, shame on me, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on you. Well, or that goes backwards.
Shame on me, yeah.
Something like that. But it's the idea that if someone consistently can't make timelines, maybe the timelines aren't reasonable, but a mentor quite often may interpret that as that, you know, you're either not working up to the level, or maybe you're really just not interested in working, or it's usually not a good interpretation. So it's important to make reasonable timelines. And I think just as important is to make sure that you take responsibility for not completing the assignment. The old, my dog ate my homework assignment, or my mom washed it. You know, those kinds of things at the level that you're at don't float as well as just saying, you know, life got ahead of me. I won't let this happen again. I'm going to, you know, I'll work even harder. I'll get this done, and set another timeline that you can actually produce the product that you all agreed upon. In your relationship with your mentor, you should also ask about the past, the present, and the future. The past, how was it when they were in graduate school? Because oftentimes we think about people who have been out for a while, and graduate school and graduate life has changed over time. But it's still nice to kind of know where people come from, so that you can get a perspective on how some of those things will, and sometimes how they won't apply to you. A second is the present. How do they manage their time to be successful? And this will not match with everyone. This is the reason why I think mentorship teams are starting to emerge, is that people just have different styles for how they work. Some people are morning people that when they get up in the morning, I'm one of those people that my mind is clear, so that's when I can write. And then by the time the afternoon hits, you know, basically, you know, cancel everything. So much is kind of piled up. I'm not as good a writer. So people have styles, and finding that out about how your mentor actually works and does things may be informative for you to figure out your own style. And then for the future, what does a junior scholar need to know in the next 5 years? No one knows that. No mentor has a crystal ball, but hopefully if they are somebody who's a leader, they're somebody who's been thinking about it. And even if they haven't thought about it, maybe they can think with you about it. Quite often we have mentors where we don't completely align with what they're doing. So their ideas may be more relevant about what's going on in their field. So having that conversation, you can kind of figure out, well, that's what's going to go on in the health sciences, but in the behavioral sciences, it's actually even trying to combine it, or it's doing differently. But you can make a very informed sort of thoughtful understanding from those kinds of conversations as you're being a good mentee in communications with your mentor.
You know, Keith, to go back to your comment about being honest and not making excuses, I can remember a time when I was teaching a class and I demanded that papers were due at a particular time. In response, I promised to the students that I would get them back in a certain amount of time, and the night before I was to hand them back, my poor sick kitty vomited all over the pile of papers. And I thought to myself, how am I going to go into class tomorrow and tell the students that my cat did it, and so I couldn't? And I felt very uncomfortable then, but tried to present to them that, you know, I was a person, I was a mentor, I faced problems too, and this was something that was out of my control. So bear in mind that sometimes when people give things that sound like excuses, they may well be the truth. Now, the research on mentoring is fascinating from a couple of perspectives. One is gender, another is age. The ideal mentor in theory is between 7 and 15 years older than the mentee. Needless to say, in my own when I was a mentee, I violated that rule by probably 25 years, and it worked just fine. But that helps to put the person having enough experience and not so much being a peer to have that big age difference. Ideally, it's nice to have a mentor who is the same gender you are. But women, you know that there are not enough women in high places or in certain positions, especially, for example, in some of the sciences and some of the technological areas, to be mentors for all the younger women who are coming up. So it's perfectly acceptable to have a male mentor and vice versa for the men. But that's where you may decide to have a secondary mentor who can help you face some of the issues about your career, like how do I have a career and do well and still have a family and still have children and still make certain other decisions? Or I'm a man, I want to have kids, I want to be involved in my kids growing up. I don't know what is going on, but sorry about my phone, guys. But I don't know how to handle that. That's a question that may better be answered by a male mentor. Now, ideally, mentor relationships end in a very positive way, and that's a nice thing when it happens. But unfortunately, there are some times where mentors and mentees go off in different directions. In the beginning of a mentoring relationship, the giving is unidirectional. The mentor is doing much more for the mentee. After some time, that tends to become more equalized, and especially in terms of things like papers being written, etc. But there may be some resentment on the part of the mentor if the mentee either branches off in another direction or is more successful than the mentor was. So it is possible that the relationships may become somewhat challenging. It's important to always be respectful of your mentor, even if you are not in agreement with the way he or she is behaving or treating you. And we would hope all mentors would treat their mentees with respect. That's a time to go out and look for some other mentors as well, not even necessarily to replace that person, but more to help you extract yourself from a negative relationship. If you think your mentor is sending mixed messages, ask for clarification. Write things down, read them back, and say, now I think what you said was this. Is that correct? And that way you cannot appear to be confused. And get out of the relationship if things get bad. There is nothing worse from a mentor or mentee's perspective than a toxic relationship that's supposed to be positive. But if you do that, don't burn bridges. Know that that will follow you for a while and that you need to extract yourself carefully with professionalism and to go on and find another mentor who can be more useful for you.
Those are very sage words indeed, because while the mentor-mentee relationship is designed to be something that really ends up being something good, occasionally, you know, they wobble a little bit, they change. They actually change over the years. I think about the relationship that I have with my graduate mentor, and that it's changed from one of, this was the person who, you know, basically, you know, dragged me into being a PhD, really helped me to be a PhD, then to become somebody who is a colleague. And when do I then talk to them about, you know, when I want things, and even for them to come to me and say, hey, you know, you've become an expert in X field, and I want to talk to you about that. I mean, those relationships actually change, and so it's expected that they might have a little bit of change to them, a little bit of wobble to them, and that while there may be some energy that's needed to try to preserve them, for the good ones, they're worth preserving. I think what we've tried to do up until this point is to try to impart upon you what I think you in part already know, and that is mentor-mentee relationships are critically important. GSA has been a home for promoting mentorship for a long time. One of the challenges for our GSA infrastructure has been there really hasn't been that much actual dollars behind what's been done. What we've done is for people like Terry Mills and for Barbara Berkman and Chandra Malhotra and James Jackson and just a myriad of other people that I can think of, they gave their time. But what we clearly saw was there was a need to actually have some funds behind the kinds of activities that would most benefit mentors and mentees. And so we came up with something called the Mentoring Effect, which is a grassroots campaign of many of your senior colleagues and mentors, as well as some of your junior colleagues, because ESPO has contributed to this fund as well, of a fund that is operated by the task force on mentoring to be able to support the infrastructure needed to be able to have mentoring work as well as it can within our association. Our goal is to support a comprehensive integrated mentoring program to ensure a strong and vibrant pipeline of professionals into the field. I, again, don't want to speak for Debbie, but I know one of my concerns ends up being, and I think one of hers too, is that we're not getting enough people into the field of aging. We know the demographics, we know all of those numbers, but if you compare that to what our actual knowledge is, it seems like we're losing the battle, that we don't have as many people coming in trying to meet and to address all of the challenges that are coming up. The more our aging population grows and shows us all of the different challenges that there are, therefore research and understanding practice as well. So what our hope is that this is one way in which we can try to strengthen that pipeline. We'll try to make sure that we have as many people there on the front line working in the field as possible. So I see Debbie gave me the fundraising one. Well, you know, it's interesting. As I mentioned, this was a grassroots campaign. It was launched in 2013 at the GSA annual meeting. Prior to that, we had actually gone to some of the people that we knew as longtime committed leaders and mentors and asked them to begin us, and we consider those our founders. We've also gone to ESPO and asked for you and your colleagues to try to, I think it was that we wanted to see if we could have $25 to match an anonymous donor who wanted to try to give a large lump sum and is going to actually match whatever ESPO gives. And so if you're still interested in doing that, please do consider giving. There's also a letter that's gone out to the fellows at large, not just some of the very special senior people that we knew about, asking for them to think about something around $250 to be able to give to this effort. And the effort was featured in the 2014 October newsletter, and it laid out some of the plans, but we continue to work on this. Dr. Gold, as was mentioned, is the leader of the task force on mentoring, and that task force is going to be doing some very exciting things during the meeting. I think Debbie will talk to you about that in a moment. That number, I still feel like that number is just old, but at the moment it's already at $86,000 in commitments, and we continue to work to grow that sum for maybe the next year, and to hopefully then have a long-term fund that can be used to be able to support the types of activities that, you know, lunches, breakfasts, activities, they all have a cost to them. And so this will be able to help perhaps do more and perhaps to do what we do even better.
And the framework on that next slide, it shows different ways in which the mentoring effect may have an impact on the society. I have to confess to you that both Keith and I were a little nervous about asking some of our colleagues for the initial give because it was a substantial ask. And we were also both delighted to hear that without hesitation, the vast majority of them agreed that mentoring was the pole upon which GSA put up its tent, and that it was very, very important to prepare the next generations of people to take over, because we're moving into a new generation, and the baby boomers are now getting into retirement, and we look to you to take over the study of aging and understanding about that process. But you can't do that in isolation. You need to be mentored in ways that we can help you with. In particular, the mentoring effect was designed to help people mentor in the context of GSA. So this is not sort of what you might ask your mentor at your institution to do, so much as it is, how do I navigate the organization? How do I get on a committee? How do I get elected to an office? What if I want to start an interest group that isn't already in place? Those would all be covered by the mentoring effect. And then certainly substantive issues about the topic or research of your dissertation or early faculty research could also be covered. Mentoring we think of as being a long-term relationship, but we can certainly have short-term mentoring relationships as well, and I'll talk in just a second about how that idea comes across. Right now I am chair of the task force on mentoring. My term ends at the end of this annual meeting, and the task force will be taken over by another very competent person and a wonderful mentor. But it is the task force that is going to have control over the money, and we are starting now with a small grant process where we are asking sections, committees, task forces, interest groups to put in a very short proposal on wanting to use some of the money for a mentoring effort, whatever that might be. That ask is going out this week, and we're hoping that we will have multiple responses to that so that certain things can be done at the annual meeting that will improve the mentoring available. We don't want to just continue to do mentoring as we have done it in the past. It's important to us to try to come up with new ideas and different ideas. On the next slide, and I probably ought to have Keith talk about it, but I'm not going to, is that some of these ideas that are new, like the speed mentoring program modeled after speed dating, which is, I'm sure, something you've all heard, a great way to have a short but helpful interaction with a mentor you might otherwise not be able to get in touch with. A blog on the GSA website where there will be a significant component for the mentoring effect, to which questions can be asked or comments can be made. The ambassador program, which started out many years ago as the campus rep program. I think I was chair of the membership committee then, and we actually began that program, but a way to link the mentoring efforts at GSA with the mentoring efforts at your university. So would be possible to give a small grant for something like that as well. This, we hope, is only the first of several webinars on effective mentoring, and when we hear your questions, we'll have a better idea of what kinds of information you would find useful. And then we are in the process of designing a toolkit, especially a handbook on mentoring and menteeing, which will be available on the website, which will deal both with the theoretical aspects of mentoring, but probably more importantly, the practical issues and aspects, and that we hope will address many of the issues. The nice thing about doing this as an online activity is that it's not a static piece of paper that has to remain the same. We will make it be relevant to the questions that we have coming in, and it will be flexible in terms of its content. And then ultimately, if you haven't been on the website in a while, it's worth going on to take a look at GSA Connect, which offers us the opportunity to have more instantaneous interaction, but also to follow ideas over time. It's really very impressive. You cannot connect to GSA Connect without logging in first, however. So please do that and then click on the GSA Connect link and you can take a look at what's up there now. For the moment, that's what Keith and I have to share with you, and we appreciate your being on the call. We're going to take questions in just 1 second. But please do know that this organization is the longest continuously funded society of aging professionals in the world. The fact that we are multi and interdisciplinary is highly unusual, but also highly relevant, since you all know that you cannot study aging or understand aging without looking at multiple aspects of the process. And that our mission is to educate, to do research, and to advocate for policy changes, with education and mentoring being probably the most important. This webinar hopes to help the ESPOs as they move from being emerging scholars and professionals into functioning scholars and professionals, do so in a way that is competent and admirable and can move us along in the future. So we'll stop there, Keith, unless you have something else you want to say.
No, I'm anxious to hear any questions that folks have.
Great, thank you. The first question that was submitted is, what do you do if you are consistently prepared but your mentor is not?
Drum roll.
Well, so for many of these questions, I think you may hear Debbie and I both answer them, because I think different people have different ways in which they address problems. I have had a mentor in the past who was like that, that no matter how, I thought maybe I'm just not prepared enough and I wasn't up to the level. So I would prepare more and more and more, and it's like they were really never prepared. And I thought, well, so I must not be a priority. So I have to understand that that person has some other things going on. And in retrospect, because I don't think I did it then, I really wanted to step back and say, so, you know, if and it wasn't an advisor, it really was somebody who was a mentor, that, you know, they weren't the person who could limit what I could do. I was just using them as a mentor to try to, you know, give advice and get opinions and so on. So what I figured was that I really needed to think about what I gave to them to get mentorship on, and to just think about, so what was I getting from them when I got anything at all from them, and to put that in perspective. And so I know that's difficult. If, for example, if it's a graduate student and we're not talking about a mentor, we're talking about a mentor/advisor, that becomes very, very difficult. But if there's no product that's created, that's a challenge and a difficulty in the world that you all are living in. You have to have products. Publications, for example, is the currency by which you will purchase your way into being a functional professional. So that gets to be a challenge, and one where maybe my solution would just be to sit down and to make an effort to talk to the mentor to see if they recognize that behavior, and to make sure that it's not something that you all are just kind of missing each other on?
We have a postdoctoral training program in aging here, and I have the privilege of leading that as well. And I've had several postdocs ask that question over time. What I would suggest is that you put requests in a particular framework. So, Professor so-and-so, here's the draft of my paper for a particular journal. If I haven't heard from you by April 15th, I'll assume that you have no comments to make, and I'll go ahead and send it in, so that you take back responsibility in part for yourself. If somebody is getting to a meeting and not having something prepared, I think it's fair to say, do you want to delay this meeting? Will you be more prepared next time? And if that continues to happen, that's when a second mentor might be really useful. Next question, please.
What do you think of hiring a dissertation coach? I am preparing for my final defense, but I am experiencing delays with my dissertation committee.
That's interesting. That is a new, fairly new sort of resource that has grown, I think, from our web and technological interconnectedness, is to have these ideas of dissertation coaches, because a dissertation coach before was just a mentor, was another mentor. I could see some utility in it, but it sounds like where the assistance is going to need to be directed is in managing who those individuals are. I really like Debbie's last point, which was to, in some ways, take leadership and to speak with the committee and to, really clearly articulate what the expectations are, to try to get everybody on the same page. Enlist people, I think, both on an individual level but at a group level, to kind of, share in that, yeah, we're all going to get through this dissertation together. You're not just doing some service, you're actually engaged in it. And so it might have its utility. I just, it depends on how much it costs. I mean, I'm cheap. I wouldn't want to pay a lot for something that would, if it was somebody who was external to my university in the context, they may not really know all of the factors that go into it.
And that's a real risk you take, because the fact that you have hired a dissertation coach may inflame your committee potentially. So think about it, and think about whether or not you're better off going to your committee or to your chair and talking honestly and saying, this is where I'm frustrated, I need some help. We don't have a lot of data on the excellence of dissertation coaches because it is such a new phenomenon. Next question, please.
How do you know if you're asking for too much from your mentor?
When they break down and cry, you will know you've gone too far. One can just simply ask that question. Because I think about all of the different sorts of relationships and the factors that go into it. For some people, for example, if your mentor has 3 young kids and she's trying to, and she lives 25 miles from the office, she's got other pressures on her such that when she gets down to the work that she does with you, it may be that she really does not have a lot of time. And so if you end up being very onerous, it could be difficult. What is so interesting is, I think about it in the past, because this is, I think, what was assumed in the past, is that mentors just did whatever they had to do. And mentors oftentimes really do extend themselves. There are different ways in which they communicate. I've been one in the past that certain mentees got my telephone number, but not all mentees got my telephone number. And I hope there are none on the phone that might hear me say that, but because some of them, I knew what they needed, and it was like, well, they're going to talk to me for a while. I can't fit that into my day from 9 to 5, but I could fit it in on a weekend, or I could fit it in an evening. And so in some ways you want to judge it, but I think one of the simplest ways is even to speak with your mentor and say, this is where I'm at. You know what's going on for me and the kinds of things I'm trying to do and what I need you to help me with. Is it too much? And if it is, what do you think a solution to it might be?
In addition, I think we are moving, at the urging of the National Institutes of Health, toward using what are called IDPs, Individual Development Plans, which typically the mentee fills out, brings to the mentor, they negotiate and discuss it and rewrite it so that it's laid out in advance what you can expect and what would be beyond a reasonable expectation. It's much harder to deal from a position of weakness, which is after the fact trying to get more or less out of a mentor or mentee. So laying out expectations at the beginning of the relationship, even as a mentee, is a really smart thing to do.
Definitely.
Next question.
If you have multiple mentors, how do you compartmentalize your life? And what if you get conflicting advice or less feedback from a mentor than you would like?
What was the first part of the question again?
If you have multiple mentors, how do you compartmentalize your life?
Well, I'll take the second part for a minute. This happened about an hour and 20 minutes ago to me, where one of my postdocs sent a letter of inquiry for a job. And in my field, we tend to keep those short and sweet, and this was long and very complex. And I asked why it was that way, and she wrote back and said, people in another discipline suggested that I do that. So she was, in fact, getting conflicting advice from me and from these other people. And I think you have to look at what you're trying to do. Let's say she's trying to go to med school, a doctor, physician, or a nurse is going to know more about that than I am. She's trying to get into a PhD program, then maybe I know a little bit more. But your gut ought to tell you in part what's right, too, and I'm a great believer in listening to your gut.
And to try to address the first part, might step back and reframe even thinking about that, because the idea of compartmentalizing, saying, well, I have mentor 1 does only X and Y, and mentor 2 does A and B, and mentor 3 does 1 and 2, is probably not the way that you as a consumer of that information is probably going to work best. It's probably that you're going to take some sort of amalgamation of information from your mentors, whether it be, by consensus. 2 out of 3 of my mentors tell me that this is what I should do, and I thought about it, and this is what I'm going to pursue, or the idea of thinking about, there's one mentor who's really senior, or they're in a different field, and it's that you think the junior mentors may be more in touch with something that you're trying to actually do. And so there's realities that are written into that. I mean, without an example, a very, very specific example, it's hard to say. But it's more than likely, I mean, one of the things that we didn't have down here as what a good mentee has to do is that you have to, in small part, hopefully you have clear lines of communication, but you have to decipher what those mentors say. And ultimately, you have to make a judgment about what you're going to do with that information. It may be that you decide you're not going to listen to them. Probably 9 times out of 10, that's not the best idea, but you're going to be using that information as a basis to make judgments for what you do. Your mentor is not there to tell you, do this and do nothing else. They're going to strongly encourage you, this is the way that you should do that. And, you use it as kind of a best practice, but you'll individualize it for who you are and what you think as well, because it's not like you get completely taken out of that formula.
This is where also being respectful is important, that if your mentor gives you some advice that you don't think is good or is contradictory to what other mentors have said, there's no point in making a big deal about it. You simply say, thank you, I appreciate that, and then you go out and ask someone else or utilize someone else's information. But if you argue with the mentor, if you anger the mentor, that's what burning bridges is all about. Next question, please.
Any helpful strategies for co-mentoring?
I think co-mentoring can be done extremely successfully. Sometimes co-mentors have very different areas of expertise. For example, if one is a substantive mentor and the other is perhaps the statistical or analytic mentor. One thing I think is important is that those two people like each other and respect each other and get along. There is no worse thing that can happen, whether you're constructing co-mentors or an entire dissertation committee, than picking people who don't have respect for each other and who will not work together. So you can talk pretty bluntly. I would like you to be my mentor, but I have had experience with so-and-so, and she might be a good co-mentor. What do you think about that? Next question.
Can graduate students be mentors?
Absolutely. We have an eminent mentor in GSA, and her name is Ellen Eidler. She was the founding chair of the Task Force on Mentoring, and she really believes in the concept of ladder mentoring, that we need mentoring all the way across our life and career, and that it can go in both directions. So we've seen that happen here at Duke in a program where graduate students are mentoring undergrads while at the same time they are being mentored by faculty. So a little bit of a ladder, and I think that can be a wonderful experience and help prepare that graduate student for being a good mentor when he or she is in a faculty position.
Yeah, I think I would second Debbie's perspective. It's interesting. There are, while what you're describing or what you're asking about is about peer mentoring, and peer mentoring often can be extremely powerful. I think for very specific things. Sometimes it's mentoring how you get along with your mentor, because you've got a fellow graduate student and you have a mentor who you have to approach in certain ways to be able to get the maximal benefit from them. And so peers can be very, very useful, very, very powerful. I think the condition and again, it's one of the pieces where the mentee is never not in the equation, is that you as a mentee have to think about, is this person that I'm hearing from actually really informed, and are they ready to be a mentor? Because it takes someone, or at least even on a topic, to be able to have the proper perspective, insight, whatever about the topic to really be able to provide you with valuable information. So you as a mentee still have to be, you have to be almost as discerning, if not maybe more discerning, from that peer information as you would be from a senior person, simply because it's just coming from a different perspective. But there's lots of questions, there's lots of issues that peers may be able to provide you with information that a very senior person might not be able to, like, how some aspects of how you actually navigate a conference. Some senior people may have forgotten what it's like to go to your first GSA meeting. Oh my gosh, there's 5,000 people. It's across 2 hotels. How do I even afford to go because I can't afford the conference hotel? They may help you to figure out, well, what you do is you go to the Best Western that's 2 blocks down, and they have a free shuttle or something. There's lots of information that you can get from peers. It's just always making sure that you're discerning enough to know that they're the right person to be able to provide you with that additional information that you need.
Next question, please.
How do you speak to a mentor who acts like a parent as opposed to a mentor so as to move that relationship towards more of mentorship and away from parenting?
That's a very difficult situation to be in, and indicates that probably the emotional involvement is more than it should be. I think you have to set up the situations in which you interact with that mentor to be as professional as you possibly can, and you may want to say to them at some point, what you just said is what my mother says all the time, but the advice I really need from you is on this topic or in this way. They're doing that primarily out of affection for you, or because they think they can help you in some way. So it's not that they're trying to be negative, but that is a really difficult area.
And I think what I would add to that is for that person asking that question to think, do you know that they act like a parent to everyone that they work with, or do they only act like a parent with you? Because for some mentors, I mean, remember, as we were mentioning, mentors are people. I mean, sometimes it's just their style, and it's one of the things as you think about, if you get the chance to select your mentor, that you actually should put into the formula of, some people actually want a little bit of parenting. Some people really are very independent, and they really want somebody who's just going to give them, give it to me straight, just give me the, give me the facts. The style at which that person interacts with, and that's one of the reasons why assigning isn't probably the most advantageous way to get a mentor. One that you can, and the speed mentoring program, I think that actually started with the GSA Fellows a number of years ago, and I think still continues today, was an effort to at least give you some short-term exposure to different people in a short period of time, but it's that what people would see is that they would talk to 3 different people, and they would get 3 different styles of even, and not only perspectives, but styles of how they actually interacted. So to some degree, I mean, that's how you shop for a mentor. You do look and see what their style is, and that hopefully would be able to help avoid a situation where they were working in a style that wasn't advantageous for you.
Next question, please.
Can you say a few words about the role of mentors for K awards?
Sure. Let's see. I would say that one, there appears to be, it used to be a little less than this, but there seems to be a move towards having mentors to be local, which in the age that we live today, it seems kind of crazy, but I think that review groups want to make sure that proximity is actually an advantage so that people have access. I don't think proximity necessarily means access, but I think that it's interpreted that way. I think in terms of mentors, of trying to select folks, it's very interesting. As a gerontologist, I think almost by nature we're interdisciplinary, we're multidisciplinary. And while you will want to have people that have different skill sets, you want to make sure that there's still a common focus to their background and their experience, because a review group is going to look at that and say, either these people, how are they going to get along because they don't talk the same language, which is a challenge, or, gosh, these people have been at the same university for 30 years, they've never worked together, so why would they work together on this? And so the type of letters that are sent need to make sure that they communicate that. Those letters are critically important. The mentorship plan that goes to a K award is critically important, because if it doesn't look like you are creating a functional relationship that with both the individual mentor as well as the mentorship team, the review committee will very quickly poke holes in it.
We had an application go in for a K award some years ago, and I thought that the applicant did a really nice job of laying out the mentorship team and saying, this is going to be the person who helps me with the substance, this is going to be the person who helps me with statistics. She had on her committee a person to help with professional orientation and education, and she really was able to cover all of the areas that mentorship would be helpful in without suggesting that any one of us was able to do all of that. And I think that more and more we are going to team mentoring in K awards and in other places as well. Next question, please.
Yes, I think this will be the last question, and it is, how can a mature adult get a mentor in the field?
Well, that is a challenging question to answer because we have no context around that. Are we talking about a mature adult who's going back to school, or a mature adult who is just interested in learning things? I don't think age is as important as status is. So if you're a student as a mature adult, you're in the same position as anybody of any age.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because when you make the statement that that the person is a mature adult, it almost, the converse then is an immature adult, and that anyone else is an immature adult. And I don't think that that's the case. But if it's the idea that a mature adult brings life experiences, and so how might one be mentored if you have life experiences, I think it would be making sure that you're taking the right approach to understanding that if you, for example, even we have some of our ESPO students are, you know, quote unquote mature adults, but the unique and important characteristic of them is that they know that those life experiences will be good additional information, but they still need the information that a mentor can provide about their discipline, about aging, about whatever the sub-discipline may actually be. And so it really is where that person has their starting point from. If they're ready to listen, if they're open to it, the age is not going to matter. I think Debbie's point that she mentioned before as well about the kind of scaffolding or ladder approach to mentoring, that the idea that a younger person might be able to help a more mature person, I think happens all the time. And so it's really the perspective the person takes towards how they get information to be able to make decisions, how they get information to be able to mature and advance their career. That then has no age limit on whether they're younger or older or less or more experienced. You know, I consider myself a mature adult, and by golly, my mentors will tell you that, yes, they mentor me, that I'm always ready to ask them a question and to try to listen to what they have to say. And so that's what creates a mentor-mentee relationship, not necessarily age.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to us, and we hope to see you at some of the mentoring events at the GSA meeting in November.
Make sure you stop by and say hi.
We'd like to thank our speakers again for participating in this webinar, and we'd like to thank all of you for attending. Our next webinar in this series will be in early 2015, so stay tuned and watch your inbox for more information on the upcoming webinar. Finally, when you exit the webinar today, please take the time to fill out the closing survey to help us continue to develop great webinars for all of you. Once again, thanks everyone for coming and attending.
Thank you.